Hello, everyone. My name is Felipe Rodriguez. I'm a professor here at King's University College in Canada, and we will be talking today about operations management. This is the first lecture of our course, therefore it's an introduction to operations management. As you may know, our course is called MOS 3330, and this is part of the School of Management, Economics, and Math from King's University College here at Western University in Canada. So we're going to be talking today about operations management and what an introduction to operations management is, differs from different sources that you have. In our case, I'd like to highlight chapter 1 from Cauchon's book, and also very important reading to understand a little bit of operations management and its interactions is Klassen's classic paper on empirical investigation of process trade-offs. And another textbook that is really good is Jacobs. Jacobs' textbook is also very well known in our industry, and we will be using that as a second source for our course. Not only that, but I also feel like it's important that we link operations to the broader scope of a firm. So not only are we going to be seeing chapter 1 from Cauchon and the process management triangle, we're also going to be looking a little bit of strategy. And I'm going to use Porter as a shortcut to analyze some of those strategic decisions that we have to make and talk about the strategic fit that is the core of operations management. So first and foremost, what I like to say is that operations management has one main goal, and that goal is to match, and I'm going to highlight this, efficiently. This is very, very important. We're going to highlight this because to match efficiently supply and demand is an incredibly, incredibly hard task. By supply, I mean this has to do with capacity. So what is the capacity of any given company to provide services or products to its clients? And demand is what your clients want. So the idea is demand is out there and we have to meet it somehow. And if you don't, your competitors will. So you gotta be able to meet demand in a way that is cost effective, in a way that satisfy your customers' needs, in a way that makes the market efficient also. So in a lot of ways, what we're talking about a little bit is the idea that what we have is in fact marketing and operations dealing with each other. So these are two very important functions of any company and any firm, but demand is generated by the efforts from your marketing and sales team, while supply is generated by the operations team. So from one end, we create demand for our products, and on the other end, we have to deliver those products in a timely fashion, at a costly, cost-efficient fashion, and according to the expectations of our demand. In a lot of ways, operations is nothing but a transformation. So you have raw materials in which you use that in a production process to produce a given product or to provide a service. And in much like we were saying before, marketing generates demand. That's a consumption process, while operations creates a production or a service process. And I'm going to tell you what I mean. In production, what you have is basically raw materials. You have capital investments, equipment, machinery, and you have labor. And while on the other hand, in the consumption process, from your demand perspective, you have utility, you have price, income, and you also have transactional costs. So you may be looking into these words and thinking, this sounds a lot like microeconomics, and that's in fact true. We, in operations, basically what you have is a transformation process, a function of your inventory, your investments, your labor, and capital. While on the other hand, what you actually have is a certain consumer utility, right? So demand has to do with the price of your product, the price of your competition's product. It also has to do with the taste of your market, the utility that the consumer has from your product or service. It also has to do with the amount of money that your consumers have to spare, right? Their income, and also market size. So how big is your market and where do you fit in that market? So all these characteristics, all these components you might have seen, for example, in a demand function equation like the one we have over here, down here, where the demand for your product could be equal, for example, the size of your market and the price of your product and how your customers see your product in terms of transactional costs, in terms of taste, and the same thing with your competitors, the price of your competition and how they rate your competition, and also the amount of money you have available and how much of that money you actually want to use to purchase your products or services. So nice little link here with operations management and microeconomics. Don't want to delve too far into this. The idea is just that demand is a very complex thing, and operations trying to meet that demand will be inherently hard. So that's why I want to focus on the idea that we have to be efficient in creating that match, that alignment between supply and demand. So I would also like to say that, gladly so, we are in a stage where we no longer have a firm or a company as a single entity looking for a profit maximization at all costs. The idea today is that we have a contemporary meaning for efficiency, and our goals of the firm have become harder, but in a lot of ways, much better. So not only we have profit, so it's important that we have a profit maximization idea in a capitalist society. A firm that does not provide for its investors might be risking to cease to exist. But then we also have to worry about the people involved in that whole process. And by that, I mean not only your employees and people working directly with your company inside the firm in the transformation process that we mentioned before, but also the community around that company and the community that that company serves. So the well-being of those people will, for many direct and indirect reasons, also help you generate profit. Motivated workers tend to be better workers, tend to be more efficient, they tend to be more productive. They also care more about their jobs. They feel like their jobs have a meaning. So a lot of ways, this arrow over here that I just said has to do with purpose. So, and from the other end, not only you need to maximize your profit, but you also have to worry about the environment. What is the footprint that you're leaving in your community, in your planet? This is very important, not only because we want to look nice, as in we're protecting the planet, but also has to do with sustainability of your process. And this is incredibly hard. For example, if you're a mining company, your production process, your operations will generate um, pollution of all sorts. So taking care of your planet has to do with mitigating um, that impact that you have in the planet, make it sustainable for next generations. If you're a service provider, you may not feel like you have a lot of pollution being done, but at the same time, you need hydro, you need electricity, for example, right? Your employees need to drive to work, and you have to deliver your services somehow. So what are the inputs that are going to this? Is the energy you're using green, sustainable energy? So those are all issues that you have to worry nowadays. And not only that, but then you also have to remember that a better planet will be able to provide you with a better existence in that company. And this also relates to people as well, right? So people taking care, the community taking care of the planet will be a sustainable community, and the planet and the environment will have a reinforcing effect on people's well-being. And the idea is this triangle here. This is a circle that reinforces each other. So a profitable company that takes care of people and planet will be a company that will be sustainable in the long run. Sometimes at the expense of short-term profits, but make no mistake, in today's world, we need those three things to go along together. And sustainability is a key issue in our operations today. So with that being said, so hard to achieve all those goals. Um, and we should add a little bit more complexity to that, right? So we're trying to achieve profits and being sustainable with the environment and taking care of the people and the community around us. But then we also have competitors, and competitors come from everywhere. And what Porter says about competitive forces basically has to do not only with your direct competition, but also where you stand in the market. So we could see, for example, that we are dealing with our direct competition over here, but we also feel competitive forces coming from your suppliers, right? So sometimes your suppliers, they they have a lot of power of bargain over you. They may force prices, they may force price increases, delivery schedules. They may constrain you somehow. They may actually feel like the industry where you stand is in fact a very lucrative industry, so they may want to join the competition if they want to. So suppliers, for sure, they add a lot of pressure into your market. So do consumers, the way they, so your clients, they also exert a great amount of effort um, in your market, be that in terms of changing demands, be that also in terms of if you are in a market that seems to be very lucrative, they may actually want to join that market and become not only your clients, but also your competitors. Um, and if that weren't enough, those competitive forces that we're talking about, they actually have a, they come from other places as well. So you may have newcomers where you weren't expecting, there was no competition coming from other than your established competitors, and then someone new pops up You know, what we're seeing today, for example, in the auto market, cars are becoming a lot more competitive today because you have not only the traditional European, Japanese, and American companies, but now there are new Asian companies coming in and increasing your competition. There are new players in the market. For example, Tesla is showing up with electric cars and disrupting the industry in a lot of ways. And you may also have substitutes from your products. So if you're talking about cars, which is a very general market, let's call it that way. So transit is a substitute to owning a car, right? A bicycle may be a substitute to owning your car. Carpooling, Uber, and so forth. So all these pressures go into your market make surviving this market harder still. And you have to respond to these external pressures, you know, the power that all these players exert on you will inherently make you take certain decisions, right? And those decisions basically are your strategy. So how are you willing to compete in this market? From operations perspective, that will lead to a chain of further decisions all the way from the strategic perspective all the way to the shop floor tactical decisions. And they basically come from Porter's generic strategies. So let's talk a little bit about those, where on one axis over here, I have the degree of differentiation, right? So how unique is your product? Is it a commodity or is it a product that has no direct competition, at least from the time being? And then you also have market scope, meaning how much of the market do you actually want to compete in? Is it going to be a local scope or is it going to be global? And those strategies, they come in different shapes and forms, but Porter calls them generic strategies, right? So if your degree of differentiation is really high, so let me put this really high degree of differentiation over here, really low degree of differentiation over here. Basically what you have is the idea that I'm trying to compete with a unique product or I'm trying to compete in a commodity type of product. And if I focus, for example, on a global market scale, I can attach those two things together and come up with what we call generic strategy, right? So Porter came up with the idea that the higher the degree of differentiation, the bigger the scope, you have what we call a differentiation strategy. And this is the idea that you're going to create a product so unique, that your clients will detach your product or your service from the competition, and that's where you're going to get lots of margin and lots of profit, and you're going to be sustainable in the long run. On the other hand, if the degree of differentiation is really small and your market scope is really large, where you may end up creating a strategy that we call cost leadership. So cost leadership has to do with the idea that you're going to make money on volumes. So you're going to make cents on each product or service that you sell, but you're going to sell so much, you're going to deliver so much that in the end, you're going to become profitable that way. So while differentiation allows you to create a product that is unique, and perhaps because it's so unique and customizable, clients are willing to pay a premium for that. On the other hand, you may also choose a strategy in which you're going to make a product as standard as it can be and produce as many of them as fast as you can and make money on volumes, right? And if your market scope is small, then basically what you have is a focus. Oops, sorry about that. Let me So what you have is a focus strategy. That's funny. Wrong pen right there, I apologize. Anyway, so you can still aim for differentiation, but you may choose to have a smaller market scope, right? So, and the same thing may happen to cost leadership. Um, although there are issues there, because if you're going to lower volumes, you might need to exacerbate those characteristics, and that will play a role in your operations strategy overall. It should be intuitive to see that the way a company structures itself for a differentiation strategy may seem a lot different than a company or a firm that will try to achieve cost leadership. And operations on that regard are also completely different. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that and where the operations fit into these strategies. So Porter also has the concept of value chain, and this is very important from an operations perspective, because it's the idea that a company will structure its processes and its information and its resources in certain typical ways, unique ways, to generate profit margins, right? So the idea of the company is you're going to create a margin that will sustain the company into the future. And if you look into Porter's value chain, you're going to look into some of these processes that or activities that are directly related to operations. For example, inbound logistics and procurement. This is directly related to operations. You have the transformation process in itself, and you also have outbound logistics over here. And we also add a little bit of technology development. So in a lot of ways, what we see is that a whole chunk of these activities that create value for your customer, they're directly linked to operations. And you need to find the proper fit. That's the idea. So operations should come in a way that we have a nice fit between our strategy and how we structure ourselves to create value for our customers. So there's absolutely no way that you can create a sustainable margin if you don't structure your operations in a way that enables you to do so. And from that perspective about creating value, it's interesting for us to think in terms of strategic trade-offs. Creating value is no easy task, especially because you have all those competitive forces going behind you. You have all those different parameters that have to do with your demand. So we can talk a little bit about what we call Pareto domination. It's the idea that you can't be good in everything, so you have to make conscious choices, particularly in operations. So if we bring back the idea of customer utility and how we create value, value is going to be created from a perspective of operations by different capabilities, right? So, and you're going to see very shortly that sometimes if you excel in a certain capability, you're going to have to make a compromise. So you can't be good in everything. You have to choose how you're going to be good at, how you're going to create. So this has to do with value in your market. And the idea is that there should be some sort of what we call efficient frontier. So the efficient frontier is the idea that although you have those trade-offs, there are points in which those trade-offs generate value in a sustainable way. And Pareto domination shows this a little bit, where you may have a firm over here, A, that has very little of capability 1 and very little of capability 2. And this company A over here is clearly being dominated by company B, where, and by that I mean company B may be at the same level of capability 2, give or take, but is way better in capability 1. So when a customer is looking for value, value over here, in terms of the competition, is being generated by the difference between these two companies. So in any given market, if you see products or services from company A and B, you would see that because of higher capability of the company B, this product over here dominates, or this company over here dominates this company. So a good example that we have in classroom very often is restaurants, right? So restaurants, sometimes we can create value in many different ways. Some of my students, they say, you know, when we ask what creates value in a restaurant, one of the things that they also say is the food has to taste good. So let's call this a taste capability. And the other thing is they don't like to wait too long for food. So let's call this speed. So ideally, you would have a restaurant that is both tasty and delivers food fast. There are many other capabilities that take place over here. For example, it could be cost or price of food or whatever, but let's just stick with those two capabilities for now, taste and speed. So here in Canada, we have many situations in which students like to put different restaurants over here. But what we may think about is the idea that if you have a restaurant that is very tasty, I'm going to put this restaurant over here, restaurant A, is very tasty, but has low speed, right? So this, for example, could be like a French restaurant or a high-end restaurant of sorts, where you're going there and speed may not necessarily be what you're looking for. What you're looking for is, amazing food and amazing environment, and you want to have fun, and it's very fancy and so forth. So the idea is taste. This restaurant made a conscious choice. It's going to be not going to be very fast in delivering food for its clients, but the food will be amazing, right? This restaurant, compared for, give you another example, restaurant B over here, where restaurant B is extremely fast, right? And although food doesn't taste all that good, so I don't want to give names over here, but this may be one of those classic fast food chains that we're talking about. And so although those two restaurants, they compete um, with delivering food to their clients, they clearly made choices as to where they stand on the efficient frontier. What you don't want to be is restaurant C over here, where this guy is slower than restaurant B, and this guy doesn't taste as good as restaurant A. So if those were, in our little example over here, the two main values that customers are looking for in a restaurant, you'd be in a lot of trouble. Because customers would see restaurant C and A and say, well, why would we go to C if A tastes so much better? And at the same time, they could look into C and B and say, why would we go to C if C is so low? We'd rather go to B. So the idea of Pareto domination over here has to do with being on the efficient frontier. And the operations impact of this is that you have to structure yourself to be able to be on that efficient frontier. Otherwise, you're pretty much out of the market. You're going to be dominated by your competition. So, as I was saying before, what you need is a operational fit. between your strategy, what creates value to your customer, and how you're going to structure your processes and your operations. So this is a very well-known idea that if I have on one hand, this is volume, so high volume, low volume over here, and on the, so the x-axis has to do with your volume of production or how you deliver your products and services, and on the y-axis over here you have the degree of standardization, so very standardized stuff and not standardized at all, unique stuff. You may see that there are certain structures that make a lot more sense. So first one being, if I could draw a line between those two different parameters, I would say that there are certain operational structures that make more sense. For example, if you have a low volume, low standardization process, what you're looking for is basically a project. This is so unique that you're only going to be doing it once, and once it's done, you're going to move on to another endeavor, right? So your operations have to match what you expect from these kinds of clients, right? So it has to be unique, it has to be their own, and you absolutely have no volume for that. So a good example of this would be, you know, if you're working in home renovations. So each house is completely unique. You have a certain skill that is transferable project over project, but no renovation will be exactly the same. And that's exactly what the customers see value from you, where they want their house to look exactly how they expect to be. And so low standardization and low volume, right? You've got to be able to be flexible enough to be those, to deliver those kinds of values to your customer. Now, on the other hand, you have, for example, a line flow like an assembly line or a continuous flow, say, for example, a pipeline, where you have extremely high volumes and the degree of standardization is really, really high, meaning you create your processes in a way that you're going to make money on volume. So the more we talk about this line of operational structures, the more we see how this can kind of link to what we had before in terms of Porter's generic strategies. So where at this end, you might be talking a little bit more about differentiation, right? And on the other hand, what you might be talking more is about cost leadership. But we shouldn't stop there. We can also see that there's a certain fit that in terms of skills, in terms of labor, in terms of staffing that go with those processes, right? So if I want to achieve a differentiation strategy, you know, I have to structure my operations on a project-based structure. The level of skill from my employees will have to be really, really high. Perhaps I'm going to have equipment that is so specialized to do what I want that it would take years to train people to do that job, right? And on the other hand, if you have an assembly line and you have a continuous flow, for example, the level of skill of those workers in the assembly line may actually be very low. So it's very easy to train. It's a repetitive task of sorts. So ultimately, it's easy to replace labor, and labor is very cheap. And by being very cheap, you actually get closer to your cost leadership strategy. Let's take this a little bit further in terms of equipment, right? Where if you have, for example, somewhere in between, like a batch type of operations, so what you're going to have here is a more generalized general equipment, right? So you buy this equipment out of catalogs and what you're going to be doing is smaller quantities of certain things, but you don't actually need anything particular from you, from your equipment suppliers. You can buy mills, you can buy presses, and you can buy all sorts of cutting machines and so forth that will allow you to perform your tasks, right? So we're talking about batch, for example. This could be a bakery, right? So you can buy ovens and different things and mixers and stuff right off a catalog. You don't have to specialize anything. On the other hand, in a project, you might actually need very unique equipment, right? So a kind of a project-based operation will be, for example, finishing an airplane. So each company requires airplanes to look, although on the outside they look very similar, in the inside they're quite unique. So you need all sorts of equipment to make sure that you can provide the um, customized product or service that your clients are looking for. And continuous flow, again, tends to go into a more specialized type of equipment where your product, you want to achieve such high volumes that you might want to talk to your equipment suppliers to make sure that they create machines that are specialized and unique to you. We may also take this a little bit further still in terms of operational fit, where we have a idea of how your product will be triggered, your production will be triggered, how the delivery of your service will be triggered. So if you're trying to do a cost leadership strategy, your operations will need high volumes. You're going to need low skilled labor, you're going to need specialized equipment, and you're going to need to anticipate demand and make sure that whenever there's demand for your product will be there. So lots and lots of inventory. So because of lots of inventory, what you're talking about is actually anticipation of demand. So production happens before demand takes place. You're working with inventories and you're trying to provide inventory as close to your customer as your customer is, because once demand needs to take place, you will fulfill that demand. So that's the idea of the pop vending machine. If you're thirsty and you have a pop vending machine next to you, you may be willing to get some sugary drinks from the vending machine. On the other hand, if your product's not there, you might actually go and drink some water instead, right? On the other hand, you may divide this and say, well, from this moment on, we're dealing more with customer triggered demand, meaning you have a order being placed before your product is ready. So it's customer triggered, right? Very different operations on this regard. While on the first one, anticipating demand, where you're talking is basically about building inventories. When it's customer triggered, you're producing something or you're delivering products that only will exist after you actually know that demand is there. So what we're talking here is, in a lot of ways, what we call a make to order. And on this side, we're talking about to make to stock. So you provide inventory in anticipation of demand and hope that your inventory is close enough to demand that you're going to catch that demand when it happens. And on the other hand, you structure yourself, your operations, for when demand is needed, only then you trigger your production or your service. And so these are all things that make operations and the structure of your operations very, very different. A make-to-order company working on project or job shops looks very, very different than a make-to-stock company that has huge assembly lines and is creating lots and lots of volume and inventory to fulfill the demand of their clients. And so in a lot of ways, we may actually have some sort of idea what we're talking here in terms of product variation. If you, in your operation, if you are building in anticipation of demand and you have very specialized equipment and you have very low skill and you're trying to make a cost leadership approach, in terms of product variation, you're going to achieve that with huge, huge volumes. So again, we can make this distinction over here where huge volumes are going to take place if your portfolio that you're going to offer to the market is in fact very limited. In fact, the less variation you have, the more you can produce and the faster you can produce. There's less changes, less setups, less maintenance in your machinery. The idea here is you're selling one product and one product only. So classic Henry Ford idea here, I will sell any car as long as it's black. So that's what we're talking about here. You're trying to achieve a low product variation, meaning you're going to offer one, as little models of products or services as you can, but you're going to provide them as much as you can and be on high volumes. So high volumes over here, low skill, anticipating demand, so you're creating inventory with very little variation. So this is clearly a cost leadership strategy. And on the other hand, if you're trying to achieve differentiation, what you actually want is the ideal differentiation is each unit that you sell or each service that you provide to your clients will be unique. And so this is a lot more to do, has a lot more to do with the differentiation strategy over here. So if you've ever taken Business 1220, you're going to see a very similar structure than what I showed before. And again, what I'm talking about here is make to order, make to stock, and how that will shape the structure and your processes in your operation. So, as I was saying before, we're looking for a contemporary meaning of efficiency, and we, in a operation, Klassen and Manor, they came up with the idea of a process triangle. And so if you want to be efficient, you have to be taking care not only with that operational fit, but you have to take the operational fit considering these three parameters, or let's call this these three variables. The first one being utilization and capacity. So by capacity, I actually mean how much you can produce or deliver to your clients. So we saw before high capacity high capacity cost leadership strategy will require lots and lots of inventory, which on the other hand will also require very low variability in your processes. And so you end up having to consider all these three things. If you change one of these, you're going to likely impact the other two. On the other hand, you may think of something as, if you are dealing with processes, maybe you want to change your capacity or your utilization, or in other words, your slack capacity, in a way that you can provide the service the moment it happens. You're agile enough that you can create inventory only when inventory is needed. And because of that agility, each one of the products that you're going to sell, the service you're selling, will be unique. So there's really high variability over here. So really high variability will ultimately impact your inventory and will also impact your utilization. So the process triangle gives us a really interesting idea that all these things are interconnected. And if you lack the operational fit required for your product, you end up having less efficient operations. So you need to consider all of those three whenever you're dealing with your operations in your system. And the idea is, if there is a lack of fit, then you're going to create inefficiencies or inhibitors of efficiency of your performance. And the inhibitors of performance, on the other hand, have to do with all those three things also, right? So from one perspective, if you don't have the proper slack capacity or the proper utilization to absorb variation in demand, for example, what you create is what we call an inefficiency of inflexibility. And this is something that Cashon, in his textbook, he talks a lot about this, how flexibility impacts your capacity to handle unexpected situations, fluctuations in demand, and so forth. And on the other hand, variability in your processes may also create another very, very problem in your operations, where if you can't handle product variability, you're going to have to generate, for example, lots and lots of waste. And so inventory, if not performed really well, what you end up having is a lot of work in process inventory, or maybe a lot of waste. So that creates inefficiency in all sorts of ways, and you can make the point that waste and inflexibility come together. So if you're so set on your production working on a certain pace, and demand fluctuates, you're going to end up having working process inventory, or you're going to have finished goods inventory, or you're going to have all sorts of things, inventory waste lying around everywhere. And ultimately, if you want to bring this into a finance perspective, what you're actually saying is you're increasing your COGS, and by increasing your COGS, you're reducing your margin. And if you look back into margin, you see Porter's value chain. You don't want to do that. And ultimately, you're dealing with variability over here, but the variability I'm talking about has to do with time. Okay, so if you have operations that vary too much in time, in terms of cycle times or in terms of processing times, this will lead to lots of inventory. And because it leads to lots of inventory, you will actually see that there is a change in terms of the rate of your production, what we call flow rate. So have in mind always those three things, because we will see later in our course that inventory is actually equals to your flow rate times your flow time. And this little equation over here, also known as Little's law, is philosophically at the root of your operations. So not only it's part of your process triangle, but it is ultimately what will prevent you to achieve extreme efficiency and being at the leader, at the efficiency curve that we saw over there. So managers have to take lots and lots of care about those three things, because as I told you before, if you change one of these, there will be impact in the others. So if you make your process faster, so you increase your flow rate, that's going to have a direct impact on your inventory. Your inventory is going to grow. Sorry, so talking about demand, for example, if your demand, the rate in which your demand comes to your firm will increase the size of your inventory. The same thing is, now correcting this, if you make your products, your production processes super fast, so you reduce the processing time, then what's going to happen to you is eventually you're going to need less inventory to fulfill your demand. So these are all things that we're going to be talking about later on. It's the idea that Little's law is at the root of operations, and we're going to use Little's law a great deal, not only to work in terms of the process triangle, but also in terms of performance inhibitors. So long story short, let's summarize this chapter a little bit. First things first, we need to, operations has to do with the match, with the fit, with an alignment. And that match is, from one end you have supply, and the other hand you have demand. So we need to match those two things together, and that's the job of operations. The other thing is, we are decision makers in operations. By no means in a business course, operations will deal with engineering aspects of operations. What we're going to be dealing with is how to make decisions. And by making decisions, I mean, we're going to have to make decisions in terms of inventory, we're going to have to make decisions in terms of flow rate, and we're going to have to make decisions in terms of flow times. So impacting one ultimately will impact all the others. So the root here is, as a decision maker, we are always trying to improve processes. And some of these processes are internal. So it has to do with my own operations, has to do with my own processes. Doesn't matter if I'm in manufacturing or if I am in a service setting. I will always have processes that I can always measure. And if I can measure, I can manage. So internal processes can always be improved that way. And then you may also have external processes along your supply chain. So if you look back into Porter's competitive forces, some of the processes have to do with your suppliers. Some of these processes have to do with delivering goods and services to your clients. So if we're going to be an improver of processes, we have to deal with not only our own, but also all along our supply chain, all along our value chain, as we saw before. So we're going to be creating efficiencies. And like I said before, efficiencies has to do with profit, also has to do with people, also has to do with planet. So those three things have to be taken into consideration no matter what you do right now. So an efficiency in operations, we're going to be dealing with all sorts of metrics over here, but most importantly, a efficient operation is also sustainable. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, please email me at frodriguez7@uwo.ca. And I hope you enjoy this course as much as I do. And now that you've seen the introduction to operations, we can get a little more hands-on exercises and cases and see how we can be effective decision makers in operations. So thank you all very much. I will now stop this recording. See you soon.